Hello, everybody. Okay, so this is Module 10, Unit 2, Biological Basis of Behavior. And the first thing we're going to do before I even start to show you the slideshow is we're going to do a quick little review of the parts of the neuron. And one thing that I like to do, I don't think I showed this to you in the last video, but I do something it's called like the hand-body analogy. And it's basically where you just, it's always sometimes good to use like your parts of your body and things like that, just to kind of remind and activate your memory. So I want you to look at your hand and your fingertips. And when you think of the parts of the neuron, if the message is first coming in, it's coming in the dendrites. So we're going to think of these fingertips as the dendrites. The message is first coming in. And then this, see if you guys can try to take a guess what that part of the neuron that is. That's like the soma or the cell body. All right, so that's going to help the cell stay alive and function. And the message first comes in the dendrites. And then what do you think my arm, and if we're going to extend, it's a really long axon. And we got the axon. And at the end of the axon, which, okay, I don't know if you really want to see. Okay, we got, can't even see it here. There's my feet, okay? So my toes would be like the axon terminal buttons or branches, right? So message comes in, goes down along the axon, and then it releases the neurotransmitters from the terminal button. So when you're taking the AP exam, you can kind of be like, if you want to demonstrate the actual like action potential, you know, comes in, then you're like, and then it releases the neurotransmitters. Okay, all right, fine. I know, it's a little strange, but you know, it's okay. It would have been much better in the classroom had we been in person and we could have demonstrated together. We could have done the neuron dance. And we did play a game in one of my classes last week, which I'll be playing in the other classes. And I was asked to do my video with the positive and negative correlation. So there you go. Although, wait, I need to add music. So that will be the next video. Okay, so moving on. We are going to be talking about nervous system. So let me pull up the slides here. It's going to take me a second. Here they are. All right, so hopefully you see the screen. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about all the neurons, the individual neurons, when they come together, the axons come together, creates the nervous systems. And or all of them bunched together are going to have really big functions when it comes to overall how our body is functioning generally. And then we also have our endocrine system, which is our hormonal system. It's another way that our body communicates and sends messages. All right, so let's jump right into it. Nervous system is the body's speedy electrochemical communication network. It's all the cells of the peripheral and central nervous system, and we're going to learn about those. So all of them are the nervous system. And they're bundled axons of many neurons that form neural cables. And they connect the central nervous system to muscle glands and sense organs. Okay, so it's the communication system, or at least one of them. There are three types of neurons. The three types of neurons are the sensory neurons. So when things first come in, they come in through your sensory neurons. The interneurons are going to be the part that's going to communicate to the brain or to respond to the immediate, external sensory situation. And then the motor neurons are actually the neurons that come back from the message from the interneurons, and it comes back for you to actually have some type of muscle movement or response to that external stimuli. So in this case, it would be lifting your finger from the hot flame. I actually have a, excuse me, a acronym that I use sometimes to try to help me remember. And the acronym is SAME, S-A-M-E, S for meaning the sensory neurons, and the A is another name for sensory neurons, which is afferent. And then the M is motor neurons, and then the E is the other name for motor neurons, which is efferent neurons. And they basically know that the sensory neurons are carrying the information to the central nervous system. And the motor neurons are carrying the message from the central nervous system to your glands or muscles. So like I said, where you would lift your finger in that instance before. This is what it looks like when we look at all of our nerves and they're broken down, the nervous system. We have this central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and all the other nerves, which is called the peripheral nervous system. I always like to think peripheral meaning outside of the central. Okay, so there's a lot of different nerves here. So that's further broken down. We call it the autonomic versus the somatic nervous system. And I'm just going to jump in real quick and tell you about the somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is like, can be voluntary. It's very voluntary and it's controlling your skeletal muscles. And when I mean voluntary, like, I'm going to do the robot. All right. I voluntarily chose to move my muscles and my hands in this particular way. And luckily, I don't do that as a regular dance on the dance floor. But that is called, that's your somatic nervous system. But a lot of your nerves are what we call automatic, and it's the autonomic nervous system. And that is where they call it self-regulated action, like your internal organs, like your heart and all of your organs. They obviously need to work and be controlled, and it doesn't have to be something that you have to tell it to do, which would make it more voluntary. All right, so there's two types. There's sympathetic and parasympathetic. We're going to get into more detail about them in a minute. So it says here, turn with a partner. I mean, if you want, I would just start visualizing like what goes here, what goes here. But we'll be doing that in class, so we'll move on. Central nervous system, it's responsible for coordinating incoming sensory message and outgoing motor message. It's made up of the brain and the spinal cord. That's the two main things you want to remember. The brain and the spinal cord is central nervous system. The peripheral nervous, it's all the other ones. And you can see how it's obviously going to be involved in controlling organs and all that stuff too. All right, so somatic, I already told you, it's a skeletal nervous system controlling body, skeletal muscles. Autonomic is the glands and the organs, operates automatically. So let's look at this question. Which division of the peripheral nervous system enables a person to move the muscles necessary to walk down the street? If you're walking like this. Okay, you are correct. It is the somatic nervous system. All right, so the next two things I'm going to tell you about, I see it every year on the AP exam, and you'll probably see it on the unit test. Making sure that you know the sympathetic nervous system versus, what's that? That was scary. So you want to take a guess what nervous system was just activated? Yes, you would say the sympathetic nervous system, which is, it basically is the nervous system that mobilizes in an emergency or just, constantly the sympathetic nervous system is being activated, or the parasympathetic. When we think of fight or flight and we think of just responding to emergency situations, mobilizing for energy, that's the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic, I like to think of a parachute calming you down. And because I think of a parachute just kind of calmly coming down the sky. And that is the calming nervous system. It's conserving energy. It's calming the body. It's rest or digest, okay? All right, so like I said, always tend to ask questions. There's a lot you're gonna learn this year about a lot of different things, and it's gonna keep coming back to the sympathetic versus parasympathetic. You don't have to memorize everything that is actually happening in your body when the sympathetic nervous system is activated or the parasympathetic, but you definitely should look it over, and it should kind of make sense to you. That when you activate sympathetic nervous system, it dilates the pupils, it accelerates the heartbeat, it inhibits digestion. Some people, I kind of sometimes like to explain, like that's why sometimes when you get really nervous or there's like an emergency situation, people feel nauseous because it's inhibited digestion and also the relaxing of the bladder, things like that. So now the parasympathetic is going to be the opposite. It's going to have the opposing response. So rather than dilating pupil, it's going to contract the pupil. Rather than accelerating the heartbeat, it is going to slow the heartbeat, etc. Okay? So just, spend a minute to look that over on your own time and go back through when you're studying. And notice how it says here that you definitely should know the difference between those two. So let's look at this question. Which division of the autonomic nervous system calms a person down once a stressful event has occurred? You are correct, the parasympathetic nervous system. All right, so remember the central nervous system has the brain and the spinal cord. It says cortex and subcortical structures. That sounds very complicated. I'm going to teach you about that when we get to the brain. But know that like the neural networks, there's a lot of, just think of groupings. Like, so there's if you looked in the brain and you would see these little clusters of neurons and axons. And the spinal cord is a two-way connection between the peripheral nervous system and the brain. It oversees the sensory and motor pathways, which we already saw. So the reason why we brought it up again is there is this one thing, you've heard of a reflex before. We have that reflex on our knee. I sometimes like hit it and you can make it like respond automatically. So how does a reflex occur? Sensory neurons, so like let's say you're touching that hot flame, you saw that picture before, and the sensory neurons send the message up to the inner neurons, and the inner neurons immediately send the message back to the motor neurons for you to lift your finger before the brain is really involved. And that's what's kind of really fascinating. It's like built in for us to just respond without us thinking about, ooh, that's hot, maybe I should lift my finger. So it's simple, reflex like that to pain occurs only in the spinal cord before information reaches the brain. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is something called the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is another communication system. This one is actually communicating in the bloodstream with hormones. You've heard of hormones before, so we're just going to learn about them. And it's the glands are what are activating the hormones. There is some differences between the nervous system and the endocrine system. We know that neurons, neurotransmitters respond much faster. So they say nano-fast. Hormones are much slower, but they tend to be longer lasting. And we know, of course, neurotransmitters are like being released through that neural impulse, that like electrical impulse. But with endocrine system, the glands are just secreting hormones through the bloodstream. Hormones are blank, released into the bloodstream. So this one you might have had trouble with because maybe I didn't emphasize it enough, but it's chemical messengers. So they are chemicals, they're not electrical, and it is in the bloodstream. These are some of the different glands. We're not going to go through every single one of them. I'm going to kind of highlight some of the real important ones that tend to be on the AP exam and that are most involved in things that we talk about in psychology when it comes to behavior and mental processes. So let's go and talk about a couple of them. Adrenal glands, we already talked about them already. Adrenal glands activate the adrenal glands to release epinephrine and norepinephrine to energize the body, the fight or flight. We know that epinephrine energizes the body, but norepinephrine actually calms the body. So it's interesting. Norepinephrine is both a hormone and a neurotransmitter, and some people get confused. So, really important. The hypothalamus is actually a part of the brain, but it is also part of the endocrine system. So we're going to come back to the hypothalamus and talk about it in more detail when we get to the brain. But for now, just know that it is also part of the endocrine system. The pituitary gland, I always talk this way when I talk about the pituitary gland. It is the master gland, the master. Yes, and what do we mean by master? The master gland meaning that it tells the other glands what they need to do when it comes to releasing hormones from their glands. Right, and the pituitary gland also has growth hormone, and it regulates growth and metabolism. So when we talk about the growth hormone absolutely is involved in growth and actual height and things like that. But also they found that the growth hormone might be involved with like aging and stuff like that. And then, like we said, involved with metabolism. So the pituitary gland also regulates like oxytocin, which stimulates contractions for breastfeeding, for milk secretion and stuff like that. Notice that it says promotes pair bonding, group cohesion, and trust. So even we believe these hormones that are being released in your body are going to be involved in like your ability to kind of bond with other people. Pituitary gland, like I said, it directs other endocrine glands to secrete the hormones. And you know, I have to say I've been teaching for a long time, and I'm just going to be really honest in this moment, is I sat and said the master gland, and I realized like as I said that, like, I don't know, I just have a problem with saying that now. It doesn't sound right. Like I don't like the word master. I feel like it's not appropriate anymore in our curriculum. And I think you understand why. So, you know, that was a real moment. And I could edit it out, but I think it has its place in staying. So rather than me saying master gland anymore, now I am actually going to say the pituitary gland directs other glands. It basically is the one that does tell the other glands, you know, and when they should be releasing their hormones and how much. All right, next. Actually, when I say next, I think we're done. We've actually covered quite a bit. So just remember, we talked about the nervous system. So right now, if you could visualize the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and how the peripheral nervous system is broken down into the autonomic nervous system and the somatic, and then the autonomic is broken down to the peripheral. I'm sorry, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and that's fine. If you're already confused, just go back a few more slides, look back over that chart, and you'll be good to go. All right, bye. See you soon.